and floor steel in Building 7, just as there is for any skyscraper. The requirements were that these steel components must withstand at least 2 to 3 hours of intense fire in standard tests. This photo shows a little bit of the fireproofing scraped away, so you can see how that's applied. Through testing in underwriters' laboratories, the steel components are given the fire resistance ratings based on thickness of fireproofing material that is applied. The NIST report for Building 7 gives these values from the UL Fire Resistance Directory. The NIST report also confirms that fireproofing was applied correctly and was not damaged by falling debris, at least not in the areas where the failure is said to have occurred. So how long does it take fireproof steel to reach the temperatures reported by NIST? This first statement from NIST says that temperatures of around 500 to 600 degrees Celsius, which they said were reached by steel in the building, would take roughly 6 hours of continuous exposure from a fully developed fire. Of course, 6 hours is much longer than 2 seconds in the computer moment. NIST said the beams in the area of first failure reached only 400 degrees, as we discussed, so that is why NIST claimed that the critical damage state was reached in 3.5 to 4 hours. One big contradiction that NIST avoided is that its investigators knew that the fire load in the building would only support about 20 minutes of fire in a given location. When they talk about 3 or 4 or 7 hours of fire, they are at most speaking of the time a fire lasts anywhere on a given floor, not in a specific location on the floor. Underneath a floor beam, for example, the fire time is only about 20 minutes, as this exchange from a NIST advisory committee meeting indicates. One member of the advisory committee asked, fire moved every 20 minutes. Essentially, it started and stopped every 20 minutes. So if you do not have fuel in Building 7, how could fires burn for as long as they had and taken out this major structure that had good fireproofing? The answer from the ever popular Mr. Sunder, Dr. Sunder, was that the fires moved from location to location, meaning that at any given location, the combustibles needed about 20 minutes to be consumed. While the combustibles at a location were being consumed, the fire front would be progressing to adjacent combustibles. That's a long way around saying that, yes, there were 20 minutes worth of combustibles in a given location. In any case, the fires proceeded without being fought, and NIST needed to estimate pathways and temperatures of the fires. They began this process by estimating the fire load on each floor. One of the unusual things that NIST did in this regard was that it estimated the fire load on floors 11 and 12 to be 50% higher than on any other floors in the building. NIST first made this estimate in its August 2008 draft report. They had based it on interviews with American Express managers who described the level of furnishings as high. American Express occupied the southwest corner of floor 13, and it was not clear how they would know about floor 11 and 12. So NIST changed the source of this claim in its final report to say that it was the Securities and Exchange Commission managers, which actually did occupy floors in 11 and 12, that made this high estimate. And then NIST simply estimated the fire load on floor 13 by saying it was assumed to be the same as the floor 11 and 12 fire load. They did this because they said there wasn't much information on floor 13. And again, going back to NFPA 921, the National Standard for Fire Investigation, speculative information like this cannot be included in an analysis. It was all pretty confusing for anyone trying to follow the story. And again, we should note that NIST was not following that standard. And NIST methods were certainly not scientific. Anyway, NIST took these assumed fire loads and along with other parameters, like the thermal conductivities and the densities of the materials involved, the details about the building structure and connections, and they put it all into a series of computer experiments. As we can see here, NIST computer simulations are actually the result of 4 separate computer models, each one built on an entirely different software and used for different things. There was a fire dynamics simulator that was used to simulate the fires and estimate gas temperatures. And then a program called Fire Structure Interface was used to estimate the temperatures imposed on the structural components. There was a finite element analysis model called ANSYS that estimated structural responses. This is where NIST proposed 3 thermal cases to study. Case A, in which the temperatures were taken directly from the 2 previous simulations. Case B, which used arbitrarily chosen temperatures that were higher than those generated by the previous simulations. And Case C, which used lower temperatures. Not surprisingly, Case B, with the higher temperatures, was what NIST settled on. Finally, the worst case scenarios from the ANSYS model were fed into a global analysis program called LS-DYNA. We see here that NIST talked about photographs and fire times in its 2004 report. This shows that around 3 p.m. fires were being observed in the northeast area of floor 12. These fires on floor 12 appear to be already past the northeast corner, moving west along the north face. And again, it's in the northeast corner of floor 12 where the initiating event occurred. In fact, the 2004 report says the fires actually bypassed the northeast corner of 12. But another interesting statement in this interim report said that the fires on floor 12 were entirely burned out at 4:45 p.m. That was 35 minutes before the building came down. So this interim report contradicts the idea that fires were raging at 5:20 p.m. It turns out that NIST did not use the photographs in its computer simulations. As you can see from this comparison of a photo in NIST report taken at about 3:50 p.m. and the NIST simulation of fires on floor 12, there is no correlation between NIST simulation and what really happened. At approximately 4 o'clock, NIST simulation shows raging fires across the north side windows of floor 12. The photo from about the same time shows no fires in that area. NIST admits that its models did not use the observed fire activity from photos and videos as a model input. So again, this is not science. Just how long did the fires last in the northeast areas of floor 12, where NIST said the initial failures occurred? NIST theory requires fires that lasted 4 hours in those areas. And although NIST refers to observed events, they're trying to match things to observed events, there's no one who observed the girder fall off or column 79 buckle. But the evidence indicates that the fires on those floors began on the south side of the building, as we saw, after 2 p.m., and in the northeast corner of floor 12, the fires were out sometime before 3:49 p.m., probably closer to 3:15. So there's no evidence for a 4-hour fire on floor 12 at 5:20 or any other time. Again, the photographic evidence tells us that the fires on the northeast corner of floor 12 burned out nearly 2 hours before the building fell. So let's review some of the deceptions we've seen in the NIST report for Building 7. NIST said that there were no Building 7 steel samples, but those samples were available. They were just left unexplained. NIST said that they took 3 years for their investigation, but they took at least 5 years. NIST said that there were 7 hours fires in Building 7, but evidence suggests the fires were much shorter in duration. NIST said that there was no water to put out the fires, but Building 7 sprinklers were functional and water was available. NIST said that there were 4-hour fires in the northeast corner of floor 12, and only 20 minutes of combustibles were available in any given location. And we've seen that the duration from photos could not have been as long. NIST said there were no shear studs on the girder. This is contradicted by NIST's own interim report and by the building project manager, Salvarinas. NIST did not use photos of fire as model input. That's because the photos showed the fires were out. And NIST said the floor slab was not heated in their model, or NIST did not actually heat the floor slab in their model, and differential thermal expansion cannot be measured without heating both the beam and the slab. And other than the deceptions, here are the reasons why NIST final theory is unscientific and false. NIST ignored previous findings on the Building 7 steel samples. No physical tests were done to confirm the mechanisms NIST proposed. Other physical tests have shown that NIST mechanisms are unrealistic. The fire theory is contradicted by the known fire resistance plan. The fires in Building 7 lasted only 20 minutes in a given location, while the steel components were rated for hours of fire resistance. NIST's final theory was based entirely on computer simulations that are not based on evidence. The fire initiation, fire spread, and fire loads were based on arbitrary assumptions. The case B assumption used was arbitrary and biased. NIST fire modeling contradicts the photographic evidence. The fires in the critical area were out long before collapse. NIST contradicted itself and known facts about shear studs on that critical girder, and the maximum thermal expansion possible could not have caused the girder to walk off its seat. Another indirect reason why NIST Building 7 investigation report is false is that building professionals around the world have not incorporated changes in building codes to prevent the devastating thermal expansion that NIST says took place. Existing buildings have not been retrofitted to prevent that occurrence either. Some of the tower recommendations on the towers were considered by the International Building Code Committee, but not the one new recommendation from the World Trade Center 7 report. That new recommendation was that NIST recommends that building be explicitly evaluated to ensure the adequate performance of structural system under infrequent design fires with any active fire protection system rendered ineffective for thermal expansion. And again, there have been no reported changes to skyscrapers around the world, so be careful. We'd all like to see how NIST reached its conclusions in any case, but we are not allowed to see it. Structural engineers Ron Brookman made a FOIA request to NIST in 2009 asking for calculations and analysis behind NIST's claim of girder walk-off. They wrote back, "We are withholding 3,370 files. The NIST director determined that the release of these data might jeopardize public safety." And it's obvious that NIST conclusions cannot be confirmed due to this secrecy. In this final slide, I'll try to recap the 7 points I wanted to convey. The destruction of Building 7 was unprecedented. The steel evidence was destroyed or unexplained. NIST's final theory followed years of failed hypotheses. NIST's final theory could not have been predicted. NIST's report is self-contradictory and contradicts other known facts. NIST's report is deceptive, and NIST's final theory for collapse initiation is unscientific and false. It's clear that NIST failed to explain why and how Building 7 collapsed. Today, there is no fire-based theory. We don't have one. We need a new investigation. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for that work and for that presentation. The more one listens to the compendium of facts with respect to Building 7, and it becomes clear that there's a sinister work afoot, one sort or another, perhaps very, very detailed and well planned over a considerable period of time. But in order to, not just to speculate about that, a legal investigation, a serious investigation, would have to look in depth